Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel Learn IT with Naval, and in our today's video we are going to create a lab for internal virtual switch in Hyper-V Manager. In our previous video we learned how we can create private virtual switch. In today's video we will see how internal switch works for the network and communication between the host and the virtual machines. Before we start our lab, let's first create or draw our infrastructure at what exactly we are going to do. Let's say this is our host machine. All right, this is the host machine that we have, and we have two virtual machines. One is this one and one is this one. All right, and both of these virtual machines would have a virtual adapter on them. So let's say this is the virtual adapter, and this Hyper-V host also has a physical adapter on it. All right, now we know that once we will create a internal switch in Hyper-V Manager, then it will create a management operating system virtual adapter. So that will be, let's say this is our internal virtual switch. Okay, and we will have a management OS virtual adapter on this internal virtual switch. All right, now how the communication should work in case of internal. Our physical machine, a Hyper-V host, should be able to communicate with our virtual machines, and these virtual machines should also be able to communicate with each other, and this will be able to, oops, this is a triangle, let's take a serial line, and these virtual machines should be able to talk to the Hyper-V host. Now we need to define our network before we set up a lab or before we do anything in Hyper-V. We need to have an understanding of the network that we are going to use. All right, so let's say that we are going to use 192.168.51.10 would be the IP address of my Hyper-V host virtual adapter. All right, so you can say that this address would be assigned to this management OS virtual adapter. And let's say for this virtual machine we have 192.168.51.11, and for this one we have 192.168.51.12. All right, let's just move it a bit. Okay, and the network address would be 192.168.51.0 with the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, because we are using the address of class C, so that's why the subnet mask we are using is 255.255.255.0. So this is the picture of our network that we would be using with our Hyper-V host and our virtual machines. Now let's get started. So let's go to our Hyper-V manager. In here, we'll go to virtual switch manager so that we can create internal switch for Hyper-V environment. Now, in the left side, you see I have some existing virtual switches already created, but we will select internal switch and then click on create virtual switch. Let's give this a name, V internal switch 1. Okay, make sure that we don't have one already here. I think we already have one. Okay, so let's give it V internal switch 2. All right, and we can also specify the same in the description. Now make sure that you select internal network while you are creating an internal virtual switch, and then click apply. All right, let's hit OK. Now, in our previous videos, we talked about the management operating system virtual adapter that gets created when we create an internal virtual switch. And where can we see that? Let's go to our network connections where we see our network adapters. So let's go to run and type ncpa.cpl, Hit enter, and you will see all the network adapters that we have right now on this computer as well as on our virtual switches. So we created V internal switch 2. So this is the virtual switch that we created, and this virtual adapter gets created as soon as we create our virtual switch. So now this would be called the virtual adapter on your management operating system. Now right click on it, go to properties, and go to internal protocol version 4, and you will see right now it is set to obtain an IP address automatically. But we know that for now we do not have a DHCP server in our environment. So what do we need to do? We need to assign the static IP on all these virtual adapters so that we can create a network with that. So we already know our network address range and the network addresses or the IP addresses that we need to assign to the Hyper-V host. So we'll give it 192.168.51.10. That's what we decided, right? And default gateway, right now, we do not have uh, the communication with any external network. So for this particular virtual switch, we can keep default gateway as empty because the traffic would not be going away from our physical adapter. All right, so let's leave it blank for now. And the DNS server, you can, if you have a DNS server in your network, you can use that. Otherwise, you can simply just use 192.168.51.10. It should point for the DNS to itself. All right, now let's hit OK. Hit OK. And let's verify that the IP address that we assigned is showing up now. Okay, it's showing up here. Let's go to command prompt as well and type ipconfig. In here, you will see the IP addresses of all the virtual adapters and the physical adapters that we have connected to this computer. Now, what we need to make sure is that our virtual adapter for the internal virtual switch is showing up. So here it is. You can see that we have V internal switch 2 and the IP address that we assigned and the subnet mask. All right, so the task for the Hyper-V host is done. Now let's move to our virtual machines. Now make sure that the virtual adapter of these virtual machines are connected with this particular switch. So right now we are using V internal switch 2. So let's go to the settings of this virtual machine of TG client 1 virtual machine and go to network adapter. Right now it only has one adapter attached to it, and right now it is connected to the private switch that we created in our previous video. So let's change it to V internal switch 2 so that this virtual machine can communicate with the Hyper-V host using this internal switch, and hit apply and then OK. Another virtual machine that we are using is TGSVR2019. So let's go to settings of this virtual machine and make sure that the virtual adapter of this VM is also connected to V internal switch 2. So right now it's connected with the private switch. So let's change it to V internal switch 2. Let's hit apply and OK. All right, now let's connect to this virtual machine. Okay, make sure that you keep the resolution to large so that it doesn't come in the small window, right? Okay, and let's enter the password. And let's also connect to the second VM, TGSVR2019. It's logging in, and let's type the password for this user. Okay, let's go back to our TG client 1, which is almost there to log in, and it has logged in. All right, now we need to check the virtual adapter that it has. So let's go to ncpa.cpl for network connections once again. The RAM of this virtual machine is a bit low, so that's why it's moving a bit slow, and it has some startup things as well. Okay, let's close this. All right, so network connections has opened. So many things to open at the startup. I must switch them off in our next video, and I will. Okay, so this is the virtual adapter that we have right now for this virtual machine, and let's see what IP address is it getting right now. And please note that we haven't assigned an IP address to this virtual adapter yet. So let's see what exactly we are getting as an IP. So you can see that in our previous video, we assigned the static IP for virtual private switch. And that must be still assigned to this virtual adapter. You can see that it is assigned, but we know that for our internal switch we have a different IP address range, that is 192.168.51.11 and 12. So let's assign this one 192.168.51 dot 11. Okay, subnet mask would be the same, and default gateway. Now in this step you need to specify the default gateway as your virtual internal virtual switch, because all the communication from these virtual machines would be directing to your internal switch, so that your virtual machines can communicate with your hyper-v host. So we are going to specify the default gateway as 192.168.51.10, which is our internal private switch IP address. Okay, and you can also specify the DNS server IP address as your internal switch. So we'll keep it 192.168.51.10. Right, let's hit OK and OK. Okay, now let's check IP config once again, and we can see that the IP has changed now. And we have assigned a static IP to this virtual machine, and it has got network 7 on it. Let's do the same process on our TGSVR 2019 machine. Let's minimize this, cancel. All right, first let's go to run ncpa.cpl, and let's check the properties of TCP/IP protocol on it. Okay, we can see that it has the IP address from our previous video, so let's change it to 51.12.192.168.51.10. Default gateway would be the internal switch IP address, and we can change the DNS server to 51.10 as well, because right now we do not have a DNS server in our internal network. Okay, so let's hit OK now, hit OK once again, and let's open command prompt. And let's go to ipconfig, and the IP address has been assigned 192.168.51.12. Now next step is to verify that our virtual machines are able to communicate with each other as well as to the hyper-v host. So let's try to ping 192.168.51.11, the other virtual machine. And here we go. Our virtual machines are able to talk to each other. This one is pinging the other virtual machine. Let's try the same thing from the other virtual machine, which is this one. And let's go to command prompt and type ping 192.168.51.12. And we can see that both of these virtual machines are able to communicate with each other. They are able to ping each other. So that means the network connection is working absolutely fine between these virtual machines using that internal virtual switch. But we discussed that our virtual machines should also be able to talk to the hyper-v host when we are using an internal switch. In the private switch scenario, our virtual machines were not able to communicate with the hyper-v host. They were only able to communicate with each other. But in case of internal switch, we have discussed that these virtual machines should be able to talk to the Hyper-V host as well. So we know that the IP address of the management OS virtual adapter on a Hyper-V host is 192.168.51.10. So we will try to ping the IP address of our Hyper-V host, which is 192.168.51.10. And we can see that our virtual machines are able to talk to a Hyper-V host as well. This is the IP address of a Hyper-V host virtual adapter. So that means, and the ping is working absolutely fine. So that means the network communication with internal virtual switch is working fine. Let's test the same thing from the other virtual machine. Let's go to TGSVR2019 and type ping 192.168.51.10, and we can see it is also pinging the Hyper-V host. So that's how you can create internal virtual switch and establish the communication between your Hyper-V host and your virtual machines. Now it depends on you that how different or how big you want to create your network, and how many virtual machines you want to use. You can also use VLAN and segregate those virtual machines in different sub networks, so that if you want to isolate some network traffic from other VMs, you can do that as well. Now, one more important thing, or before that, let me show you if we are able to ping any of these virtual machines from our Hyper-V host. Let's go to Hyper-V host. This is our Hyper-V host command prompt, and we will try to ping 192.168.51.11. And we can see that we are also able to talk to our virtual machine from a Hyper-V host. Now, there is a very important thing to note. If we go to our virtual machines, and let's minimize each and everything here, you will see that right now this virtual machine does not have access to internet. Why? We already discussed that in case of internal switch, by default, your virtual machines are not able to access any external network, or they are not able to access internet by default. But there is a way that we can use to enable internet access for our virtual machines which are connected with your internal virtual switch. And what's that way? So that is called natting. So we will use natting to enable internet access on our virtual machines. And how exactly we do that? We are going to see the same. Now, for that, what you need to do, you need to go to your Hyper-V host and open PowerShell. All right, so let's open PowerShell as an administrator and hit OK. All right. Now, there's this command that is new netnat. So this is the command new dash netnat that will allow you to enable natting for your particular network. Now in here, first you will use this command new dash netnat, and then you will type the name of your virtual switch, which is v internal, or let's try to just copy the exact name from our virtual switch manager, which is v internal switch 2. All right, and let's go to PowerShell once again and type the name of your virtual switch. So this is your virtual switch on which you want to enable netting for. Right now, next is we need to use a switch. This is the PowerShell switch I'm talking about. So that is internal IP interface address prefix. In here, we will specify that what is the network range that we are using for this particular internal switch. So the network range that we are using is 192.168.51.0, and we have a slash value as 24 because we are using the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. So to be able to enable NAT, you need to use this command new dash netnat and then specify the name of your virtual switch, and then use the switch dash internal IP address prefix and mention the network range of your network address. Hit enter. Now you will see that we have got this output that for this particular virtual switch and for this particular network range, the netting has been active and the status of net is true. Right now, we can also use a command get net to know that for which switches we have enabled netting. So if we use this, you will see that all of these networks have the netting enabled. So for now, we will focus on v internal switch 2, and we can see that this is also coming up in the output. So that means we have enabled NAT on our virtual machines. Now, what exactly it will do? Let's find out. So let's connect to one of our virtual machines. So let's go to TG client 1 and see what's the difference here. So ideally, after enabling NAT, our virtual machines should be able to access internet. Now let's see. Right now it's showing no internet access. Let's see why is it showing that, because we have enabled NAT as well on our virtual switch. So let's check the network configuration on this virtual machine. So let's go to network connections and to the adapter properties and here. So our connection looks fine. IP address is of the right network address range. We have got the correct subnet mask, correct default gateway. Let's first try to open google.com in Microsoft Edge. Let's see what exactly it says. Okay, google.com. Okay, so it says google.com, so IP address could not be found. And if you go to details, it will show you all these troubleshooting steps. So one thing we need to make sure is that because we want to have our virtual machine access internet, so it should be able to resolve the URLs that we will be opening in a web browser. Now, to be able to open or to be able to resolve a URL, the DNS should be working properly on a virtual machine, and the DNS should be able to communicate with the external DNS hosts or the public DNS hosts. So for that, we need to set the preferred DNS of this virtual machine to 8.8.8.8 because we do not have an internal DNS server as of now in our environment. So what we can do, we can use the public DNS, which is 8.8.8.8. That's Google's DNS. Now let's hit OK. All right, and hit OK once again. And now let's do one thing. Let's go in here. Let's type google.com. And there you go. We have internet access on our virtual machine. And even if we want to open, let's say, uh, tech articles, if we want to search, I may have misspelled it, but all we want to do is to make sure that we are able to open all sorts of websites. So here you can see we are able to open the websites on our virtual machine, which is connected with a internal virtual switch. So I hope you are able to get the understanding of how exactly internal switch works and how we can enable internet access on our virtual machines which are connected with internal virtual switch. So it concludes our video where we learned how we can create internal switch in Hyper-V environment, how we can enable internet access on our virtual machines. And in our next video, we will learn about the external switch, how we can create the lab of external switch in a Hyper-V environment, and how we can make the communication happen between our virtual machines with the host and with the external networks. So we will find that out in our next video. Thank you everyone for watching the video. I hope you understood the concepts that I explained here. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.